Right, we are officially live, and I'm very pleased to say that we have the, what's the word I'm looking for, articulate and scintillating Dr. Anastacia Tomson. And before we go into the whole discussion of what it is that we want to talk about, you are a very accomplished person. You are a doctor, a medical doctor. You are, well, you're still, I mean, you're qualified, so technically you're still a doctor, and apparently when there's an emergency, even if you're down the road, you're always a doctor, even at 4 o'clock in the morning. And then, of course, you are an author. You've just recently written a book, which we'll be talking about as well, and you are a transgender activist. Is that correct? Amongst many other things.
Amongst many other things, yeah, that's fair.
Okay, so what I want to do is I want to begin by unpacking some of the terms that people use, because even someone like me who can read off a website, there's still a little bit of ambiguity and confusion, and I think that someone that has been through an experience like you will have lots to share. And also, because you are a transgender activist and a gender activist, because you are involved in various communities, you could probably add a lot more to the definitions by giving examples so that it makes it a little bit clearer for us. So, to begin with, transgender. What, in your mind, is the best way to describe someone that is transgender?
Yeah, so, you know, without getting too bogged down in technicality, the sort of broad definition of that, because recognizing there's a whole bunch of different people who fall under this label who identify as transgender, really, if you break it down, it means someone who does not identify either completely or partially with the sex that they were assigned at birth. So now I've kind of brought in this concept of sex, and, you know, for anyone who isn't really familiar, one of the things that happens as soon as a baby is delivered, you know, the doctor kind of pulls them up by the legs and smacks them on the bum and says, congratulations, it's a boy or it's a girl or it's a something. So that's really an assignment that's made based on an assessment of external genitalia. And, you know, as part of the work that I do, I educate a lot of people around what these concepts actually mean. External genitalia is just one of a multitude of factors that goes into a determination of sex. But we have kind of this idea that sex is this very binary thing, that it's male or it's female, and that ties into the genitalia. So penis being male and vulva being female, and that assessment is made. Whereas gender is a matter of identity, it's kind of who you are. So gender and sex don't always line up. And then within those brackets of gender and sex, not everything is very strictly and very clearly and very consistently male or female. So those are some of the misunderstandings. So to come back to your question, someone who identifies as being trans, it would say, well, the doctors assigned me a certain thing at birth, and I feel that that assignment is not completely accurate for me, or maybe not accurate at all. Maybe it's completely erroneous. That's kind of a spectrum that exists.
So then, within that spectrum, you would have someone, let's say, a girl born in a boy's body.
All right. So I'm gonna stop you right there. And you know, and I understand it. These are the terms that we use in popular culture. You know, I am something in a something's body. There's a lot of there's a concept of agency that's involved with our bodies. So there's really been a movement in the queer community, the LGBTQIA community, especially the trans movement, to kind of reclaim that ownership over our bodies. So this is my body. I'm a woman. It's a female body. It was assigned male at birth, or it was assigned female at birth. So that's kind of the language that we like to use. So, you know, we don't talk about you were born a man, you were born a woman. I mean, we were born babies, right?
True. But I mean, technically you were born in a body that happened to be male.
Assigned male. Assigned male. Right.
Now that's very interesting. Okay, so now this is important for me to understand the terminology.
So give me a moment to go into this, because this is actually kind of a fun exercise to do. You know, I mentioned a little bit earlier that when we think about sex, we often break it down to external genitalia, but there's a lot of concepts that come into sex. So, you know, when Now just imagine I usually do this workshop with like a group of people in front of me. So I'll say to them, all right, external genitalia, that's the one thing. Who in this room knows what their external genitalia look like? And of course, if you don't, you can sneak into the bathroom and take a look in the mirror and kind of figure it out. Right? That's 1 out of 5 things. The next thing, hormone levels. So we talk about estrogen and testosterone. So I'll ask a group of people, how many of you have had your hormone levels tested? And sure, if you are a cisgender woman and you're going into menopause, you might have had those levels tested. If you're doing like a full physical examination or a screening, you might have had those levels tested, estrogen, testosterone, that kind of thing, right? Okay, 2 out of 5 that you might be sure of, that's great. Internal reproductive anatomy. So now we're talking about things like, do you have a uterus or do you have a prostate? Now, some people will know that they do. You've seen it on a CT scan, you had an ultrasound, you had a prostate examination, something like that. You know, someone might have told you that you have these organs. You might have found them for yourselves. You might just make that assumption based on, you know, I get menstrual cramps. It's probably coming from what I think is a uterus. Okay, that's 3 out of 5. Internal reproductive anatomy. Then we look at what tissue actually comprises your gonads. Are they ovaries or are they testes? And we don't always know. I mean, there's a lot of cases in which you'll find that there's a mixed tissue specimen or something like that. So I will say to people again, how many of you have had a needle biopsy taken of your gonads, sent to the laboratory, analyzed under a microscope, and had a report as to whether that tissue is ovarian or testicular? And then finally, chromosomes. Have you actually had your chromosomes tested? So you can understand, when I put those 5 things together, right? External genitalia, hormone levels, internal reproductive organs, gonadal tissue, and chromosomes, we make a lot of assumptions. So the fact of the matter is, there are very few people who are certain of what all of those 5 things are in their particular case. We just kind of assume, oh, you know, we looked in between the legs, we saw something that looked like a penis, we said it was male, we didn't do hormone tests, we didn't do genetic testing or karyotyping, we made these assumptions. So again, even in my case as an activist, you know, I make a point of this, I don't know what my sex is. I know what I was assigned at birth and what went onto my birth certificate and all of those records. But as you can see from what I've just explained to you, a lot of that was based on assumption, and a lot of science is emerging to suggest that those assumptions are really flawed, and potentially as many as 1 in 50 people might have something in those 5 categories that doesn't really line up as strictly male or female, or that doesn't match up with the other characteristics. So those are what we call intersex conditions, and they're a lot more common than we've ever expected. So I'll give you another example now. You might have a very tall, very slender, beautiful woman with the most flawless skin, the most delicate bone structure, the most chiseled facial features. Often she'll be like a model on the runway, a supermodel. At the time that she tries to fall pregnant, to conceive, she will recognize that she's infertile. When we test this woman, we'll find that her chromosomes are 46XY, which is what you would commonly associate as a male genotype, right? XY. You with me?
Yeah. And?
What happened in her case? She has a genetic mutation that rendered her cellular receptors for testosterone to be impaired, non-functional. Testosterone has no effect. So her body didn't respond to those molecular signals, those hormone signals, to develop male features, even though she has this 46XY genotype. But she is regarded by the rest of the world, and in a lot of cases will identify as being a woman, and not just that, but like the epitome of feminine beauty. You know, she's a runway model. So that gives you an idea. You know, sometimes, you know, we think intersex is something that you can pick up at birth, but a lot of times people will only find out at puberty. A lot of times people will only find out when they're trying to conceive. A lot of times people won't ever know.
Wow. So, I mean,
mind-boggling, right?
Well, no, what you've just done is, I mean, you've basically pointed out from a mathematical point of view, if one takes a look at the bell-shaped curve, one has to acknowledge that there are cases on either end, And although most fit under one umbrella, they don't know if they actually fit under that umbrella, that middle bit, because they haven't fully tested all the aspects.
Well, that's exactly the thing. You know, you speak about the bell curve, and we're not just talking about the shoulders. You know, when I say science is suggesting 1 in 50, you know, that's within like 1.5 standard deviations.
Correct. Wow. Okay, see, I'm learning, and this is the one thing that I was so excited about. To be a teacher, one has to continuously learn as well. And I think
Oh
that
yeah,
it's always good to learn from people who are living the experience. So
sure.
from what I can understand, if someone is assigned the male sex, but their mind, they have always been female. It's not a case of when did they realize they were female. You were always female from the time you were born.
Yeah, so, you know, generally, I mean, what I speak about is that identity, who you are, is like this immutable concept. It cannot be changed, it cannot be shifted, it is what it is. That identity itself might be dynamic. You know, so you have
Mm-hmm.
people who have this kind of gender fluid identity, you know, where it shifts and changes and that kind of thing. But that's a product of the identity itself. That's having a dynamic identity. You can't decide, you know, I identify as a boy, tomorrow I identify as a girl. You know, that you don't have control over. So again, when it comes to most trans people, that identity has been established for a really long time. Um, what is variable is when did I learn how to interpret what that meant? Because
Mm-hmm.
remember, we live in this very binary society, this cis-sexist society. So what that means is that society makes an assumption that whatever you were assigned at birth is the way that you identify. That's regarded as being the default. And any departure from that is seen as kind of deviant, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now, given that idea, for someone whose identity doesn't line up with that assignment that was made at birth, sometimes it's very hard for them to navigate and to interpret the feelings that arise from that because they haven't been given the resources. They've never been taught about concepts like being trans or gender identity or the difference between sex and gender and all of those things. So sometimes that disconnect will manifest in a lot of different ways. And, you know, for example, that's why it's not uncommon to hear a story of a trans person like coming out at age 60. Some of them did know since they were like 2 years old. A lot of them, it took some time to figure it out. Speaking from personal experience, I mean, I've been I've been out for about 2 years now. I started hormonal transition, which not all trans people do, but that basically means I started taking hormones in February of 2015. And once I'd got to that point, a lot of the experiences that I'd had dating back to my childhood started to make sense. You know, there were all these things that happened to me, all these experiences that I had, all these interactions that I had with people where I thought, I feel very different, and I don't know why. I don't understand. I feel like I have to put on an act in order to fit in, because if I just behave in a way that's natural to me, it garners all of this unwanted attention. So I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have the resources to understand and to articulate and to put it into words. Oh, actually the reason that I feel this way is because everyone kind of expects me to act like a boy, but I'm not a boy. So I didn't grasp that until, you know, the third decade of my life. And that's just
Wow.
because I had, you know, I grew up recognizing attract less attention, don't stand out, play the role, and just fly under the radar because the attention is uncomfortable. You know, I tried my best to fit in.
But that's really, really difficult because you are going through this emotional roller coaster, and your logical mind says, play it safe because you don't understand it yourself, but neither will anyone else. And if I do, so to speak, confront people with this issue, my life could come to an end in the way that I know it, and I have this comfort zone, but
Yeah.
it's uncomfortable and it's a comfort zone at the same time.
Well, I mean, it's not just that, because, you know, when I did ultimately come out and when I did start to stand in my truth, there was definitely a very tangible price that I paid for that. My life was turned upside down. The fact of the matter is that and it comes back to this idea, I was never empowered with understanding, with the resources, with the knowledge, with the language even, to make sense of all of these experiences. So for all of those years, I couldn't make the decision. I couldn't say, well, I'm scared to put this out there because I didn't even know what it was. Even if I'd wanted to put it out there, I didn't have the words to do it. And that is such a disempowering space to be in, because you feel like there is no option just to kind of, and try and wrap your head around this idea of you've never fit in. Everyone's always had these expectations of you, and for some other reason that you can't comprehend, you've never felt like you can live up to them. So it's that constant feeling of inadequacy, that constant feeling of I'm other, I'm something different to what is expected. And because of all of these value judgments that we apply, remember I said society is very geared towards understanding certain things as normal. So if you're outside of that, you become subject to a lot of judgment and a lot of prejudice. We're taught, even if no one sits us down and says, listen, Steve, LGBT is bad, you pick it up. You pick it up from the media. You pick it up from parental attitudes. One of the things that I say is that if we don't talk about issues like this, we are making a statement, and the statement is that these are not fit to be discussed. It's not like you can just shy away from it and avoid it. If you don't confront it, if you don't talk about these things, you're saying that there's a reason for it, because there's guilt, because there's shame, because there's something wrong with it. So as soon as you feel like you're different, and you're confronted with all of that guilt and shame and the consequences that might come of it, it's terrifying. And you just kind of get by. You just kind of accept, well, I don't fit in. I'm different. Something's broken inside. And it's really not a nice way to live.
But now you managed to navigate through it, and I won't say unscathed, because the emotional abuse that you've been through must have been completely degrading, and you have friends and family who probably might not have been so supportive, and yet you get so many people around the world who are going through a similar experience, but they don't have the tools or the support structure, or they haven't been able to take the first 3 decades and then realize afterwards this is what it is, and unfortunately their story takes a very different turn.
And this is why I do what I do. I think I wanted to reach 2 groups of people. I wanted people who haven't had these experiences. So basically cisgender people, who don't, who've never had to contend with stuff like that. Do you ever get anxious when you have to present a driver's license or an ID document? It's a foreign experience to you. So I wanted to give you that window of insight. How does it feel? What am I going through? So that people can kind of better understand that. And then the second motivation was really, well, there are people out there who are struggling with what I was struggling with, and who feel very alone in this process. Because when I came out and I started to transition, I really didn't have representation. I had this genuine uncertainty. I don't know what is going to happen to me. How is the world going to treat me? What am I going to look like? What are people going to think? What are they going to say? What kind of difficulties am I going to go through? Am I going to survive it? Because, like I said, I was at this kind of crossroads where I knew, well, if I don't do something soon, I'm not going to survive. But at the same time, I didn't know that this would be any better. I didn't know that these challenges that I'm going through weren't going to be the end of me. So I want to reach out to people who are going through that, to say you're not alone, to say that there's some light at the end of the tunnel, to say that other people have been in this situation, and just having, obviously the specifics of it will differ, but there are some fundamental concepts in my experience that I hope people will be able to relate to and will resonate with them. And, through that resonance and that commonality, just to say, oh, I feel a little bit better about this. I'm not broken inside, There are other people like me. This is a thing that happens. And not just that, but, there is this this Anastasia woman who's gone and written a book. It's a big deal. It says that you can actually achieve things despite the fact that you're this fabulous, magnificent queer being. Like
I,
you can still
I
do
love
things in the world.
that. I mean, I think that perhaps maybe the book was a cathartic experience for you to kind of put your life experience down on paper, because that also helps you to confront many of those issues that you were going through.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I mean, like I said, the book was completed within a month of leaving my place of work, and um, since that time, I've continued to, whether it's through the blog, I keep a blog, a regularly updated blog. I
Hmm.
do a lot of writing. I do a lot of stuff on social media. I do a lot of kind of interviews or appearances or speaking engagements. Like we're doing this now. I spoke at a law firm the other day. Just speaking about my experiences and my journey and trying to give people that window of insight. Some of it is kind of cathartic and I suppose self-indulgent. I
Well, I mean, you're
can't say that I
entitled to
don't
it. You
get
had
something out of it.
three
Yeah,
decades that you never got a chance to indulge in it, and now you can almost celebrate some of
yeah.
the newfound freedom that you've discovered.
Well, that's it. And then, the other part is just recognizing that the writing and the speaking and this voice that I have are the tools that I can use in order to try and influence some change, you know? And I'm not going to change the world by myself, but every voice counts, and being accessible, being visible, being that representation for people who don't know where else to get it, there's value in that. So
I mean, you say that you're not going to change the world, but if you change one person and that one person changes the people around them, you are
yeah,
changing the world. So I beg to differ. But here's a question. You go and present to a legal firm. You've obviously presented to medical personnel, but there's still the stigma. There are still legal
yeah.
hurdles that you have to jump through. What are the main issues in South Africa, and why the hell can't they get it right?
I don't know why they can't get it right, and a large part of it probably has to do with a lack of empathy and compassion, and a lot of
But don't we have the most
misunderstanding.
progressive constitution in the world? So they say.
Well, what do you do with it? So it's not the most progressive because I think Malta takes the cake there. Malta have
Okay.
done some amazing things. They allow you to self-determine your gender. So in South Africa, you can update your ID document, but you need proof in terms of signed letters from two doctors in order to allow you to do that, to say that you've had medical or surgical gender reassignment. So again, it kind of imposes these restrictions on you in that, if you choose not to have medical gender reassignment, it undermines your identity. So in Malta, that's not a thing. You can just determine who you are, and
Uh-huh.
that's good enough.
Okay,
They've
but now let me
banned,
ask you this.
yeah.
Why was I not asked to provide two doctors' letters when I applied for my birth certificate
Because we're
and
Swiss
ID?
sexist, because we've got these double standards. So now
But you
not
see,
just
that's
that,
wrong.
but I know it's wrong. I mean, listen, I went 50 weeks without an ID that was accurate from the time that I applied to the time that I got a new ID document. And at the end of it, I was dragging the minister and his department through the mud on Twitter. And if I hadn't done that, I might not have an ID even today. So
Wow.
you can understand, 50 weeks, it's a year without your ID document. Every time you get on a plane, every time you get in the car, you have to worry about being pulled over by a metro cop. You can't go into the bank because they want your ID documents. Now you have to explain to a total stranger why you have the wrong ID document. Think about applying for a job. They want your CV, they want proof of qualifications, they want a school certificate or a degree or a copy of your ID or something. You have to now put yourself in this very compromised, vulnerable position because you don't have access to this legal document. It prejudices you in so many ways. And, the flip side of this is, well, why does it take 50 weeks? What are you scared of? Surely,
Correct.
you know, the one thing I'll tell you, if you're going to try and perpetrate fraud or something like that, or you want to embezzle millions and millions of rands, you don't go through this in order to do that. You find a smarter way. You know, going through transition is life-altering. It is a difficult, painful, lengthy, costly process. No one does this on a lark. It just doesn't
No,
happen. You know,
no. I
it's
mean,
like,
you wouldn't
well,
choose. Today's Wednesday. Let's go
yeah,
through
I'm just
hell.
gonna, yeah, you know, I'll be a girl today. It doesn't work like that. And that's that kind of misunderstanding. So again, it comes down to, you know, how do we view people who are trans or who are queer or who are different? Why do we see them as lesser, as unable or unqualified to make decisions for themselves? Why do we feel a need to protect them from themselves, or why do we feel suspicious of them? You know, like this whole fury over transgender people in bathrooms. I mean, what do you
What
do
is
when you
going
go to the
on with that?
what do you do when you go to the restroom? Like, you go there to do your business and get out. You're not there
Uh-huh.
to check on people or to predate. You know, there are far better spots for sexual predation than a public bathroom. I mean,
Uh-huh.
it's ridiculous, you know? And like,
But now in America, they are quite progressive in certain schools. They've obviously said that they are either dual gender bathrooms, if you
yeah,
can call it that, or they've had an extra bathroom. I mean, some have gone through special lengths to say, I'm afraid that's just the way it goes. You can't use that bathroom. But if you've got individual stalls in a bathroom, then it shouldn't really be much of an issue.
I mean, Steve, it's not just that. Like, you know, I go to the gym every single day, and after my workout, I go into the ladies' change room because I'm a lady, and
Correct?
I wrap myself in a towel, and I shower, and if I need to pee, I pee, and whatever it is, and I get dressed, and I put on my makeup, and I leave. And no one is victimized, no one is persecuted, no one feels threatened, because I'm just there doing my business like anyone else. And this is the
Okay?
thing. You know, if people look at you and they can perceive that you're different, then suddenly we start to get, you know, all of these ideas again about threat, and we have to be scared of you because you're different, and we have all of these ideas. And it's just based on absolute spurious nonsense. And I'll tell you this, in the US, more Republican statesmen have been convicted of sexual assault than trans people. In fact, the figures for trans people are zero. There's never been an incident. There has never ever been an incident.
Sure.
So, you know, where does the fear come from? I mean,
Well,
think for a
we
moment.
know
If
what the problem is. It's people who are myopic, people who have preconceived ideas and prejudice because of the way they've been brought up. But now I
yeah,
think that the time where activists like you get to open up this topic to more people, so that
yeah,
empowers them to start making better decisions and hopefully pass that knowledge on to their children. And talking of that, I have heard of a couple in Cape Town whose child has been born and their gender identity is female, but they've been assigned a male body. Am I getting my terminology right here?
just say assigned male at birth. That's a good.
Assigned male at birth.